Okay, so imagine this. You're in Cabo San Lucas, right? Sipping a margarita on the beach at some luxury resort. Paradise, right?
Sounds pretty idyllic.
But what if I told you that under those pristine golf courses and, those sparkling pools,
Uh-oh.
a volcano might be brewing?
Okay, now you have my attention.
We're going deep on some seriously eyebrow-raising reports about geothermal activity under Cabo's most exclusive
All
spots.
right, so where do we start with this?
Well, we found this article in California Hoy, written by a journalist named Cuauhtemoc Morgan.
Okay, and what's this journalist saying?
He's been covering a swarm of earthquakes just south of San Jose del Cabo.
A swarm of earthquakes. That's never good.
No, not at all. And these started right after a 4.5 magnitude tremor back in September.
So relatively recently.
Yeah, this year. Not exactly what you want to hear when you're thinking about, vacation homes or whatever.
Definitely adds a new layer of risk to that real estate investment.
And get this, the swarm seems to be centered around this place called the Diamante development.
Diamante. I know that name. It's like a super high-end resort in residential areas. Yeah.
Exactly. We're talking luxury resorts, golf courses, those multi-million-dollar villas, the whole 9 yards.
So not just some random patch of desert is feeling the tremors. This is like prime real estate in Cabo.
Right, and Morgan hints that this seismic activity could be tied to geothermal activity under Diamante itself.
So is this a real possibility, or is he just hyping things up for a good story?
Well, here's where it gets even weirder. Back in 2018, Diamante's CEO actually paid for a study to look into geothermal potential in the area.
So there might be something going on down there.
Seems that way, yeah. And the study's actually public. You can find it on the Mexican government's website.
Okay, so what did they find?
Well, that's the thing. Some sections are blacked out, like totally censored.
Censored? What? Why?
That's what we're trying to figure out. But even the parts that aren't censored are pretty wild.
Like what? Give me the highlights.
The study confirmed they found high-temperature water at a super shallow depth, like only 32 feet.
Whoa, that's not deep at all. You could practically dig a hole and hit hot water.
And this wasn't totally new information either. Back in 2007, they were doing explorations for a desalination plant.
Okay, trying to make fresh water from the ocean. Makes sense in a place like Cabo.
But guess what they hit instead of salt water?
Don't tell me. Lava.
Lava. And hot water. They had to completely scrap the project.
Talk about an unexpected discovery. So they knew about this geothermal potential and still went ahead with Diamante. Seems kind of risky, no?
Right. And there's more. The study also found that Diamante sits right where two faults intersect.
Faults, like breaks in the Earth's crust. Those things that cause earthquakes.
Exactly. And they can be like pathways for magma to rise to the surface. Not exactly what you want under your luxury condo.
So we have geothermal activity, earthquakes, and these faults. That's a bit of a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
Yeah, and our journalist, Morgan, he's saying there's a connection between all of this. And that leads to the idea of a caldera.
A caldera? Hold on, you're saying there might be a giant volcanic crater like Yellowstone under Cabo?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out. The evidence for it is kind of murky, especially because those studies are censored, right?
So we don't know how big it could be or how active it might be. That's terrifying.
Right. So you could be like teeing off on a golf course, totally oblivious to a volcano brewing beneath your feet. Talk about hidden potential, right? But if there is a caldera down there, what does that mean for Cabo and for the people living and vacationing there?
Yeah, what are the actual risks we're talking about here? That's what we need to figure out.
Okay, so we've got this potential volcano simmering under Cabo San Lucas, but those censored studies are driving me crazy. What can we learn about this caldera from what we do know?
Yeah, it's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Yeah.
But there are definitely some clues that point to this caldera being a big deal. Remember how back in 2007, they hit lava while exploring for that desalination plant?
Oh, yeah, can't forget that.
That's not something you just stumble upon accidentally.
Mm.
It's a pretty strong sign of some serious volcanic activity in the past.
Makes you wonder what else is down there, right?
Right. And remember, those two intersecting faults under Diamante, those are a big red flag too.
Oh, yeah, those faults. They're like cracks in the earth, right? I remember you saying that.
Exactly. And faults and volcanoes, they go together like, well, margaritas and Cabo.
Okay, I'm following you. But how do those faults connect to this whole caldera thing?
Think of it this way. Those faults, those cracks, could have allowed magma to escape in the past, which is probably how this caldera formed in the first place.
So like a giant volcanic eruption way back when.
Could be. And those faults could become active again any time, which could trigger more geothermal events.
More earthquakes, more lava.
Potentially, yeah. Which is why those censored parts of the study are so frustrating. They probably have crucial details about how big this caldera is, how deep it goes, and the likelihood of it, waking up.
So we have these faults, the evidence of past eruptions, that hot water they found just a few feet underground, and now this recent earthquake swarm. It all points to something big brewing down there.
It definitely paints a picture of a pretty active geothermal system, maybe even centered around this mysterious caldera.
All right, so let's play this out. Let's say there is a massive active caldera under Cabo. What does that mean? What kind of impact are we looking at?
Well, there are two sides to this coin, right? On one hand, you've got this incredible energy source just sitting there. A massive geothermal power plant could provide clean energy for the whole region.
So we're talking about turning a potential threat into an energy gold mine.
Exactly. Cabo could become a model for sustainable energy. Think of the possibilities.
Okay, I like where this is going. Less fossil fuels, more clean energy. That's the good side. But
Mm.
what about the bad side? What if this caldera decides to, erupt?
It's important to remember that volcanic eruptions are still pretty rare, and scientists have ways to monitor these things, so we'd probably have some warning.
So you're saying it's not like Cabo's going to vanish overnight in a fiery explosion?
Probably not. But even without a full-blown eruption, there are other risks. Those earthquakes we talked about, they could get stronger or more frequent. And that ground subsidence, where the land starts to sink, imagine what that would do to those fancy resorts.
Okay, yeah, not a good look. So even if a massive eruption isn't likely, things could still get pretty messy.
Right. And remember, that risk atlas for Los Cabos is super outdated. It doesn't even take into account this potential caldera.
So we don't even know the real extent of the danger. And people are just like building houses and hotels right on top of it.
It really highlights the need for updated risk assessments and better planning.
So what can we actually do about this? Can we, stop a volcano from erupting?
Unfortunately, no. We can't control Mother Nature. But we can be smarter about how we build and prepare. Strong building codes are essential. Structures need to be built to withstand earthquakes and ground shifts.
So make sure things are earthquake-proof from the start.
Right. And existing buildings can be retrofitted to make them more resilient. And early warning systems, that's key. If scientists see signs of an eruption, people need to be able to evacuate quickly and safely.
So it's about being prepared, having the right systems in place, and making sure people know what to do if things go south.
Exactly. But let's shift gears for a minute. We've talked a lot about the risks. Let's talk about that upside again, that clean energy potential. What could that look like for Cabo?
Yeah, let's focus on the positive for a bit. Paint me a picture of a geothermal-powered Cabo.
Imagine a Cabo that's largely self-sufficient, running on clean energy. Geothermal power plants providing electricity, heating, even desalinated water.
So we're talking about more than just keeping the lights on. It's about a whole new way of life.
Exactly. Reduced carbon footprint, sustainable tourism, a model for other regions to follow. It's a pretty exciting vision.
It sounds almost too good to be true. Are there any downsides to geothermal energy?
Like any energy source, it has its challenges. One concern is the environmental impact of the power plants themselves.
What kind of impact are we talking about?
They can release small amounts of greenhouse gases and other pollutants, and they can sometimes affect groundwater resources.
So it's not completely emission-free. That's a bummer.
No, but the emissions are way lower than those from fossil fuels. It's still a much cleaner option.
Okay, so that's good. But what about the groundwater issue?
Sometimes geothermal plants can draw down groundwater levels or change the water's chemical makeup. So careful planning and management are super important.
So it's not a perfect solution, but it does seem like a step in the right direction.
It's about weighing the pros and cons and making sure geothermal development is done responsibly and sustainably.
We need to make sure it benefits the community and doesn't cause more problems than it solves.
Exactly. And that's where the social and political aspects come into play.
Oh yeah, we haven't really touched on that. How do those factors fit into this whole geothermal puzzle?
Well, geothermal development can be pretty controversial. You've got developers who want to build, residents who are worried about their property values and safety, environmental groups, and then the government trying to balance everyone's interests.
It sounds like a recipe for conflict. A lot of different players with different agendas.
You got it. And the decisions that get made can have huge consequences for everyone involved.
So how do we make sure things are done fairly and that everyone's voice is heard?
Transparency is key. Developers need to be upfront about their plans, the risks, the benefits. They need to work with the community, address concerns, and make sure everyone's on the same page.
No more censored reports.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Honesty and openness build trust.
Okay, so we've seen how geothermal energy can be good and bad. But has it actually worked anywhere else? Are there examples we can learn from?
Actually, geothermal energy has been around for a long time. It's been used for centuries in places with high geothermal activity, hot springs, geysers, that kind of thing.
Like those incredible photos of Iceland you always see, with the geothermal pools and spas.
Iceland is a perfect example. They're basically a geothermal powerhouse because they sit on a volcanic hotspot.
So they've literally turned their volcanoes into a clean energy source. That's amazing.
Pretty much, yeah. Almost all of their electricity and heating come from geothermal.
So it can work. Are there other countries doing this successfully?
New Zealand is another good one. They have some huge geothermal plants.
So Iceland and New Zealand, they're leading the way.
Yeah, and tons of other countries are starting to explore the potential. The US, Italy, Kenya, the Philippines. It's gaining momentum globally.
That's pretty inspiring. But let's bring it back to Cabo. What are the challenges and opportunities specific to that region?
Well, Cabo's a major tourist destination, so any geothermal development has to be super carefully planned to avoid scaring off the tourists.
Right, we don't want people thinking they're going to be caught in a volcanic eruption while sipping their margaritas.
Exactly. But like we said, geothermal energy could actually be a good thing for Cabo. Less reliance on fossil fuels, a more sustainable future. That's appealing to a lot of travelers these days.
It's a balancing act, right? Trying to protect tourism while also exploring this new energy source.
Right. And it goes back to what we were saying about transparency and community involvement.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. But those censored studies still bug me. Why would anyone keep that caldera information from the public?
It's hard to say for sure, but there are a few possible reasons.
What are you thinking?
One possibility is that the developers are worried about property values and tourism.
Like, if people knew there might be a volcano under their luxury villa, they wouldn't buy it.
Makes sense, right? It's a business decision. But it still feels kind of shady to keep people in the dark about a potential hazard.
I agree. People have the right to know what they're getting into. What are some other possibilities?
Well, the government might be trying to downplay the risks, maybe to prevent panic or avoid hurting the economy.
So it's about keeping things calm, even if it means withholding information.
Yeah, it's a tough call.
Yeah.
But I think being honest and open is always the best policy in the long run.
So we've got the developers maybe trying to protect their investments, the government trying to maintain order, and then there's always the possibility that the censored information is incomplete or just plain wrong.
Right. Maybe they're still figuring things out and don't want to release anything premature. These things take time.
So maybe it's not a deliberate cover-up, just a lack of complete information.
Could be. Geothermal systems are really complex. It takes a lot of research to understand them fully.
It sounds like we're just scratching the surface of this whole situation.
We are. And it's a story that's still unfolding. New information could come out any day that changes everything.
This whole thing's been a real eye-opener. Makes you wonder how we deal with development in places where nature might have other plans.
That's the big takeaway here, right? It's a clash between human ambition and the raw power of the planet.
And it feels like we often prioritize short-term profits over long-term safety and sustainability.
It's a pattern we see over and over again. And this case really highlights how important it is to plan ahead, assess the risks, and communicate openly.
So instead of just reacting to disasters, we need to anticipate them and try to minimize the damage.
Exactly. We need to be more proactive, especially in areas with known natural hazards.
It makes sense. But I bet it's harder to do in practice than it sounds.
Oh, absolutely. Economic pressures, political roadblocks, conflicting interests, it all gets in the way.
It's a tough challenge, but it feels like the stakes are too high to ignore.
They are. Finding a way to balance development with protecting the environment and the people who live there, that's the key.
And that's not just a Cabo problem, is it? This is a global issue.
It's a challenge we're facing everywhere, especially with climate change making natural disasters more frequent and intense.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? What have we learned from this Cabo deep dive?
For me, it's about the importance of science. We need to invest in research, gather the data, and actually listen to what the experts are telling us.
Don't just bury our heads in the sand and hope for the best.
Exactly. And then transparency. We need to be open and honest about the risks, not censor information or try to sweep things under the rug.
So everyone can make informed decisions.
Right. And finally, we need to be more collaborative. Developers, residents, scientists, the government, everyone working together to find solutions that benefit everyone.
It's not just about profit, it's about building a future that's sustainable for everyone.
That's it. It's a tall order, but this Cabo case shows us why it's so important.
It's been a wild ride, this whole geothermal saga.
It has. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll look at how journalists have shaped this story and explore the wider implications of geothermal energy for the world.
You know, thinking about this whole Cabo situation, it makes you realize how important journalists are in all of this. I mean, if it weren't for people like Cuauhtémoc Morgan digging into this, would we even know about any of this?
Oh, absolutely. Journalists have been crucial in bringing this whole geothermal thing to light.
They've been doing the digging, literally. Uncovering those censored documents, talking to the people in Cabo who are worried about what's going on.
Exactly. They're holding the powerful accountable, making sure the truth gets out.
Like watchdogs. We need more people like that, especially when it comes to stuff that could affect people's safety.
A free press is so important. They keep us informed, expose wrongdoing, and, make sure those in charge aren't getting away with anything.
So big shout out to all the journalists out there who are like digging for the truth, even when it's buried under a mountain of like paperwork and corporate BS.
It's because of them that we can even have these conversations and push for things to be done right.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about geothermal energy, volcanoes, earthquakes, all that fun stuff. What are the key takeaways from this whole deep dive? What should we remember?
I think the big thing for me is how everything's connected. You've got this amazing natural resource that could provide clean energy, but it also comes with these inherent risks that can't be ignored.
And it seems like the more we learn, the more questions pop up.
Yeah. And this Cabo situation, it really shows those tensions between human progress, the power of nature, and how we try to find solutions that work for everyone.
We've got developers, residents, energy companies, the government, all these different players with different priorities.
Right. Finding common ground isn't easy, but it's crucial. And this whole situation just underscores how important things like scientific research, community engagement, and just being honest and transparent, those things are.
And we can't forget about the role of journalists, like we were just saying. They're the ones who often bring these issues to light in the first place.
Absolutely. This has been a fascinating deep dive, but it's clear that the story of geothermal energy in Cabo, well, it's far from over.
It's a story that's still being written, and who knows what twists and turns are coming next. But it does make you think about how we approach development in places where, nature might have other plans. What have we learned from all of this, and how can we apply it to other situations where, human ambition meets natural hazards?
It's a reminder that what seems like a quick win in the short term, it can sometimes come at the cost of long-term sustainability. We build in risky areas, we ignore the warning signs, and then we act surprised when something bad happens.
We need to shift from just reacting to problems to, anticipating them and being proactive.
Exactly. This Cabo situation really drives that point home. We need better planning, more thorough scientific assessments, and better communication between everyone involved.
So anticipating problems instead of just waiting for them to happen seems like a no-brainer. But I imagine it's not that simple in the real world.
It's definitely complex. You've got economic pressures, political agendas, different people with different priorities. It's hard to get everyone on the same page.
It's a tough challenge, but it feels like we have to try, right? The stakes are just too high to ignore.
They are. It's about finding that balance between development, protecting the environment, and making sure people are safe.
And that's not just a Cabo problem, is it? This is something we're facing all over the planet.
Everywhere. Especially with the climate change and making these natural disasters more and more common. What we're seeing in Cabo is just one example of a much bigger global challenge.
So, as we wrap up, what are the key lessons we can take away from this whole deep dive? What can we learn from Cabo and apply to other places facing these kinds of issues?
For me, it all starts with science. We need to invest in research, listen to the experts, and not ignore those red flags when they pop up.
More burying our heads in the sand, hoping things will just work themselves out.
Exactly. And then transparency. Being open and honest about the risks, the potential downsides. No more hiding information or trying to downplay things.
So everyone can make informed decisions about what's best for their community. And what was that third thing? Collaboration, right?
Yes. We can't do this alone. It's about getting everyone involved, working together to find solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
It's about building a sustainable future, not just chasing short-term profits.
That's it. It's a challenge, for sure. But this whole Cabo situation shows us why it's so important to get it right.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. From hot water and lava to hidden volcanoes and censored studies, it's been quite a journey.
It really makes you think about our relationship with the planet, how we make decisions when things are uncertain, and, that constant push and pull between what we want and what's actually sustainable in the long run.
We've explored the potential of geothermal energy, that tension between economic growth and protecting the environment, and, the importance of science, honesty, and community involvement.
And while we don't know what the future holds for Cabo, one thing's for sure. This geothermal story has a lot to teach us all.
So as we wrap up this episode, we're left with a question for all of you. How can we harness the power of nature responsibly and sustainably, ensuring that development benefits not just us, but future generations as well? Something to think about.